Okay, so vegan ground beef. This is a big one. This is a tricky one for me because for the most part, I don't think it's worth the time and effort to try to completely 100% replicate the taste of animal foods with plant foods per se. I think if you're gonna go for a one-to-one replication of something, more often than not, you're gonna end up disappointed because it's not gonna be exactly the same often, no matter how hard you try. And I think that's one of the struggles when it comes to the perception of going plant-based, because it seems like you're limited when it comes to the options available. But in my honest opinion, when I went plant-based, I started trying things that I never have before, and to be quite honest, I probably never would have tried if I never decided to transition in the first place. And in some ways, it's opened up an entirely new realm of cooking that I would have never discovered. And this is something that I find pretty frustrating on my end because there's so many beautiful, delicious plant-based foods out there. Why don't we just highlight them instead of replicating things that already exist? And for the most part, I gotta be honest, I stick to that premise, but there are some certain things that are staples to so many different recipes, it might be worth it on occasion to come up with a good substitution. And again, it might not be one-to-one in terms of texture, and it might taste a little different, but again, different does not necessarily mean better or worse, it's just different. So that's why we're gonna go with a plant-based version of ground beef today. And we have a few ingredients in our arsenal that we can use to get close to replicating that flavor. Now, in my opinion, you can make this even more flavorful than you ever could with ground beef. It's just a question of getting close to the same texture, and to me, that's probably the harder thing to do here. So to make up the base of our ground beef, we're gonna use 3 particular ingredients, and the base of this ground beef is going to be lentils. Now, from a health standpoint, lentils are probably one of the best legumes out there. They are a fantastic source of fiber, a fantastic source of plant-based proteins, and one of the big stigmas associated with the plant-based diet is a potential inability to get enough iron. Now, depending on the lentils you use, it's gonna vary slightly, but you're looking at about 35% of the daily allotment of iron you can find in only 1 cup of lentils. Never mind the litany of B vitamins, particularly folate, potassium, zinc, copper, manganese, phosphorus, and magnesium that you can find in lentils. Now, for this particular recipe, I'm gonna be using a French green lentil, but you can feel free to swap this out for something like black lentils or brown lentils, as you'll still have that same kind of color. Personally, I prefer the French green lentils because of their texture. Now, the second big ingredient here is going to be mushrooms. Now, I'm using cremini mushrooms, and they're a very nutritious food as well. I did a separate video specifically on that, so I'll link that here. But the reason we're gonna use mushrooms here is because that helps kind of replicate that texture that you find in ground beef. Speaking of trying to replicate that texture, we're also gonna be using some chopped walnuts. Now, walnuts are a super nutritious nut, great source of healthy fats and minerals. Walnuts are particularly touted for their omega-3 content, which is also nice to have. So now that we got the textural component of our ground beef covered, now we have to go over flavoring it. So I remember when I used to have ground beef, I almost always sauteed garlic and onions, so there's no surprise that's gonna be going in here. But if you've seen any of my other videos, you're gonna see some ingredients that you see very often in terms of trying to replicate that kind of meaty flavor. Particularly, some of my go-tos are smoked paprika, tomato paste, and tamari. Now, you can easily substitute the tamari out for soy sauce if you don't have an issue with gluten. To further enhance this meaty flavor, we're gonna use things like ground cumin, onion powder, and garlic powder. And if you really want to go for an extra meaty flavor, you can use porcini mushroom powder too. Now, generally, I don't use that because it's hard to find, but if I do find it, you only need a very small amount if you're going to use it. So the preparation for this plant-based ground beef is pretty straightforward. Now, you can use canned lentils or dried lentils. I use dried lentils, so I cook them in about twice as much water, seasoned with a little bit of salt and pepper, and cook those off for 20 minutes until the water evaporated. And then once those lentils are ready to go, it's basically just time to put everything together. So in our hot pan, we're gonna add our diced onions and garlic, season that with a pinch of salt, and then we're gonna cook that down for 4 or 5 minutes till that onion is fragrant and translucent. Then we're gonna add our mushrooms and the tomato paste. We're gonna also add a pinch of salt here, and we wanna mix this so our tomato paste is evenly combined. And then we're gonna cook this down for 5, 6, 7 minutes until the mushrooms have released all their liquid and it's burned off. Once that's done, we're gonna add the lentils, the walnuts, and then all of our spices. We're gonna toss this until everything is evenly combined and warmed through. This is gonna take probably 3, 4 minutes. And then our ground beef is good to go, and you can can use it on whatever your heart desires. So if you say want to add it to a taco with some leftover cashew cream, some homemade pickles and chopped herbs, hey, you can go that route. You can also, for instance, chop up some celery and carrots, add this to a tomato sauce, and you have a quick vegan bolognese. You can also add some ground flax meal or even oat flour to thicken this up, and then it becomes the base for a plant-based meatloaf. So again, there's so much versatility here, so much flexibility, and depending on maybe adding 1 or 2 ingredients or swapping 1 or 2 out, you can change flavor profiles and also texture profiles, and that's what makes this recipe a great base to know, learn, and master, because you can use it in so many different ways. Never mind how healthy and nutritious it actually is. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video. I'm gonna go eat those tacos I talked about, and I'll see you guys next week.